The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting harsh shadows across the operating table. Dr. Sarah Chen's gloved hand trembled, something that hadn't happened in 15 years of surgery. "Suction," she commanded, her voice tight. The scalpel had just pierced the grotesque mass bulging from 13-year-old Dylan Morrison's neck. She'd expected tumor tissue, maybe pus, infection. Instead, dark strands spilled from the incision. Hair. Long, human hair. The surgical resident beside her went rigid. "Dr. Chen, I see it." She continued cutting, professional training overriding shock. Her forceps closed around something white and hard. She extracted it carefully, held it under the light. A tooth. Fully formed. Adult molar. Perfect enamel. The scrub nurse stepped back, hand over mouth. Dr. Chen found 2 more teeth, then bone fragments, then something that made her freeze completely. A small pigmented sphere with a dark center. Ocular tissue, part of an eye, growing inside a child's neck. Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments, along with the city you're watching from. Now let's continue with the story. 6 months earlier, Boulder, Colorado welcomed summer with a kind of golden sunshine that made everything feel possible. The Morrison household sat tucked into a quiet suburban street, where mailboxes wore fading paint, and front yards spoke of modest middle-class lives carefully maintained. Inside the 3-bedroom ranch house, Rebecca Morrison moved through her morning routine with practiced efficiency. At 38, she carried herself with the determined posture of someone who'd spent 2 years proving she could handle single parenthood without help. Her auburn hair, hastily pulled into a ponytail, framed tired eyes that rarely stopped calculating. Client showings, mortgage payments, grocery budgets, the endless mathematics of making it work alone. The divorce had carved her life into before and after. Before, when Tom had sat at the breakfast table reading the sports section. After, when she drank coffee from a travel mug while checking real estate listings on her phone, one ear listening for her son's footsteps upstairs. Dylan Morrison, 13 and lanky at 5'7", moved through the house with the quiet consideration of a boy who'd grown up too fast. The divorce had shifted something in him, made him careful with his words, protective of his mother's feelings. He had his father's dark brown eyes and his mother's tendency to swallow problems rather than speak them aloud. His passion remained unchanged: baseball. The worn leather glove sitting on his dresser had been a gift from his grandfather, Becca's father, who died when Dylan was 8. The old man had been a Korean War veteran who'd taught Dylan to pitch, to field, to love the crack of bat against ball on summer evenings. Every other weekend, Dylan visited his father in Denver, where Tom had remarried and started over. The visits were pleasant, but strained, like conversations in a language both of them were forgetting. Becca's mother, Helen, lived 20 minutes away and visited most Sundays bearing casseroles and unsolicited advice. At 72, the silver-haired widow carried herself with the no-nonsense authority of a retired nurse who'd seen too much suffering to tolerate foolishness. Her husband had died in 1973, years after returning from Vietnam, his body finally surrendering to Agent Orange exposure that doctors had dismissed as nothing serious. Helen had learned what waiting cost. The Morrison house itself told stories through photographs that lined the hallway. Dylan at 5, grinning gap-toothed in a baseball uniform. Dylan at 10, serious-faced at his grandfather's funeral. Some photos had been carefully cropped, Tom's presence edited out of frame, leaving Dylan and Becca floating in incomplete compositions. This particular June morning felt unremarkable. Becca checked her email while Dylan ate cereal. The kitchen smelled of coffee and normalcy. Neither of them knew that by sunset, a small discovery would set in motion a countdown neither could stop. Outside, sprinklers hissed across lawns. Birds sang in elm trees. The mountains stood purple in the distance, beautiful and indifferent, waiting for the story that would unfold in their shadow. The baseball field shimmered in early June heat, the kind of Saturday morning that smelled like fresh-cut grass and possibility. Parents filled the bleachers at Boulder Creek Baseball Field, half watching the game while checking phones and sipping coffee from paper cups. Becca Morrison sat 3 rows up, her attention divided between Dylan on the pitcher's mound and the urgent email from a client about a property showing. Her fingers moved across her phone screen, typing responses while her son wound up for his pitch. The game was close, 3-2, Dylan's team losing with bases loaded in the final inning. Dylan gripped the ball, his lanky frame coiled with concentration. He'd been working on his fastball all season, dreaming of making varsity when he started high school next year. The pitch flew. The batter connected with a sharp crack that made everyone wince. The ball rocketed back toward the mound, a vicious line drive that had Dylan diving instinctively to catch it. He collided mid-air with Marcus, his teammate rushing to cover the base. Both boys hit the ground hard. The coach and several parents rushed onto the field. Becca's phone clattered onto the bleacher as she ran, her heart hammering. By the time she reached Dylan, he was already sitting up, touching the right side of his neck. "I'm okay," he said quickly, seeing her face. "Just hit my neck weird." "You sure?" Becca knelt beside him, scanning for blood or obvious injury. "Want to sit out?" Dylan shook his head firmly. "I'm fine, Mom." "We need this win." The pride in his voice, the determination not to let his team down, it was pure 13-year-old boy. And Becca recognized the stubborn set of his jaw. He'd inherited that from both parents. The coach checked him over, found nothing alarming, and let him continue. Dylan finished the inning, struck out the final batter, won the game. His teammates swarmed him, celebrating, while Becca returned to the bleachers, telling herself she worried too much. Tom had always said that. Maybe he'd been right. In the locker room after the game, Dylan splashed cold water on his face, feeling the adrenaline drain away into exhausted satisfaction. His fingers touched his neck, where Marcus had hit him, a tender spot below his jaw above his collarbone. He pressed gently. Something felt wrong. Not painful exactly, but there was a hardness under the skin. A small bump, maybe the size of a pea. Firm, unmoving when he pushed it. He prodded it again, frowning. "That's weird," he thought. "That's not where Marcus hit me." "Mom!" he called out toward the parking lot as they loaded equipment into her aging Honda. "There's a weird bump on my neck." Becca was juggling a bat bag and her phone, which had just buzzed with another client message. "Probably just swelling from the collision, honey. Ice it when we get home. But it's hard. Like, really hard. Bodies are weird, Dylan. Bruising spreads. You're still growing. You get bumps." She balanced the phone between her ear and shoulder as another call came through. "Yes, Mr. Peterson. I can show the property at 7 tonight. Dylan, throw that glove in the back seat, would you?" Dylan touched the bump again. "It's not where I got hit, though." "Hold the ice on it for 20 minutes, Becca said, only half listening as she navigated out of the parking lot, her mind already on the evening showing. It'll go down by tomorrow." At home, Dylan sat at the kitchen table with a bag of frozen peas pressed to his neck. The lump remained, hard and strange under his exploring fingers. While his mother made dinner and fielded phone calls, he pulled out his phone and typed, "Bump on neck after sports injury." Google offered reassuring results. Hematoma, muscle knot, swollen lymph node. Rest and ice recommended. Monitor for 2 weeks. See? Nothing serious. It'll go away. That night, Dylan had a dream he couldn't quite remember when he woke. Something about things growing beneath skin, roots spreading where they shouldn't be. He touched his neck in the darkness. The bump was still there. On his nightstand sat a photograph from when he was 5, taken at this very same baseball field. His grandfather stood behind him, hands on his small shoulders. Dylan picked up the photo, studying his younger self's grinning face. In the picture, just visible on the right side of his neck, was a tiny, dark mole. Dylan set the photo down without making the connection, without realizing he was looking at the exact spot where, 8 years later, something dormant was beginning to wake. 4 weeks crawled by. The bump that Dylan had promised would disappear instead grew, steadily, quietly, like something with its own terrible patience. By late July, it had swollen from pea-sized to the size of a large marble, a hard protrusion that no amount of ice could diminish. Dylan finally broke his silence one Monday morning. "Mom, it's not going away." "It's getting bigger." Becca looked up from her laptop where she'd been reviewing comparable sales for a difficult listing. Really looked at her son for the first time in days. The bump was visible now even from across the kitchen, a distinct bulge on the right side of his neck. Something cold moved through her chest. "Okay, I'm calling Dr. Patterson this morning, first thing." At 8 o'clock sharp, she dialed Boulder Pediatric Associates. An automated voice greeted her with manufactured warmth. "Your call is important to us. Current wait time is approximately 18 minutes. Becca put the phone on speaker and continued getting ready for work, listening to hold music, ironically an instrumental version of Don't Worry, Be Happy. 18 minutes became 22. She checked her watch repeatedly, tension building in her shoulders. When the receptionist finally answered, her voice was professionally chipper in that particular way that suggested she'd already had this conversation 100 times today. "Boulder Pediatric Associates, how may I help you?" Becca explained quickly. 13-year-old son, neck lump, 4 weeks, definitely growing. "I see. Is he experiencing any fever?" "No." "Any pain or difficulty breathing?" "No, but I understand your concern, Mrs. Morrison. Let me check Dr. Patterson's availability." The sound of typing, a pause that stretched too long. "Our next available appointment is March 12th, 2024. Becca blinked. "I'm sorry, what?" "March 12th. That's our earliest opening." "That's 8 months away." Her voice rose despite her efforts to stay calm. "His neck is swelling." "It's growing." The receptionist's tone shifted into a script she'd clearly delivered many times. "I completely understand your frustration, Mrs. Morrison. The post-pandemic backlog has created critical staffing shortages across all pediatric practices in the area. Without acute symptoms, fever, severe pain, or respiratory distress, we can't classify this as urgent care. So what am I supposed to do?" "You could try urgent care. However, without insurance pre-authorization, you're looking at $400 to $600 just for the initial visit, before any testing." Becca opened her banking app with shaking fingers. Balance, $847.23. Rent was due in 3 days, $1,200. Tom's child support check was late again, the third time in 4 months. She stared at her son, who was eating cereal and scrolling through his phone, looking completely normal, except for that bump. No fever, no pain. He was laughing at something on his screen. The receptionist's voice cut through her calculations. "Mrs. Morrison? Are you still there?" "Yes, I'm here." Becca closed her eyes, making the decision. March 12th. I'll take that appointment." "Perfect. We'll see Dylan then. If his symptoms worsen, high fever, trouble breathing, or severe pain, please go directly to the emergency room." Becca hung up and looked at Dylan. "We've got an appointment for spring. But if anything changes, any pain at all, any trouble breathing, we go to urgent care immediately. Deal?" Dylan nodded, secretly relieved. He hated doctors. Deal! That evening, Dylan's phone buzzed with a video call from his father. Tom's face filled the screen, his new wife's modern kitchen visible behind him. "Hey, buddy, how was your week?" They talked about baseball, about school starting soon, about nothing important. Then Tom leaned closer to the screen, squinting. "Dylan? What's that on your neck?" Dylan's hand moved instinctively to cover it. "Oh, got hit at baseball last month. It's fine." "That doesn't look fine. Have you seen a doctor?" After Dylan logged off, Tom immediately called Becca. His voice was tight with concern. "What the hell is on Dylan's neck, Rebecca? Don't swear. And we're handling it. We have a doctor's appointment." "When?" "March." Silence. Then, "March? That thing looks like a peach. That's 8 months away." "I'm aware of how calendars work, Tom." Becca's voice went cold, defensive. "The medical system is overwhelmed. That's the reality we're dealing with." "Then take him to urgent care. Tonight. I'll pay for it." "Oh, now you want to be the hero?" Pride flared hot in her chest, mixing with fear and exhaustion, and the barely healed wounds from their divorce. "Where were you when he had nightmares about you leaving?" "When I was working 2 showings a day to keep us afloat." "This isn't about us, Beck. This is about our son. I've got this handled." Her voice was final, unyielding. "He's fine." "No fever, no pain. The medical professionals said March. They wouldn't schedule that far out if it was serious." She hung up before he could respond. In his room, Dylan had heard every word through the thin walls. He touched the bump, now impossible to ignore, and whispered into the darkness, "Please just go away. Please." The bump remained, growing in silence, patient as a countdown clock ticking towards something neither he nor his mother could yet imagine. September arrived with the familiar rhythm of new school supplies and nervous anticipation. Dylan Morrison pulled his 10th shirt from the closet, held it up to the mirror, and watched his reflection with growing despair. The bump, now the size of a golf ball, showed through everything. Every collar betrayed its presence, a visible announcement of something wrong. He settled on a thick hoodie despite the 80-degree forecast. Becca appeared in his doorway, keys jangling. "You'll roast in that." "I'm good." She glanced at her watch, already late for a morning showing. "Okay, honey, have a great first day of 8th grade." The hallway of Boulder Creek Middle School smelled like floor wax and possibility. Dylan entered with his hood up, keeping his head down, but whispers started almost immediately. Former friends stared, fingers pointed. The hoodie only made it more obvious that he was hiding something. Jake Winters, a boy who'd failed 7th grade once and wore his cruelty like a badge, stepped directly into Dylan's path. "Yo, Morrison, what's wrong with your neck? You got a tumor or something?" Laughter rippled through the group around Jake's locker. Dylan's jaw tightened, but he said nothing, just pushed past and kept walking. Marcus Chen, his best friend since third grade, fell into step beside him. Ignore Jake. He's always been an ass. But even Marcus's eyes kept sliding toward the hoodie, toward what it was concealing. In English class, Mrs. Patterson, a kind woman in her 50s who'd taught at the school for 20 years, looked up as Dylan entered. "Dylan, hood's off in class, please." He hesitated, then slowly pulled the hood down. The classroom went silent. Every eye fixed on the grotesque swelling distorting the right side of his neck. Someone gasped. Two girls in the back row whispered behind their hands. Mrs. Patterson's professional smile faltered for just a moment before she recovered. "Thank you." Her voice was gentle, but Dylan saw the concern in her eyes, the way her gaze lingered on his neck, even as she tried to focus on her lesson plan. After class, she asked him to stay behind. "Dylan, I'm worried about you. Have you seen a doctor about your neck?" "My mom's handling it." "When is your appointment?" "March." Mrs. Patterson blinked. "That's 6 months away." "It's fine. It doesn't hurt." The lie came easily now, practiced. "Dylan, I need to contact your mother. This is—" "Please, don't." Panic crept into his voice. "She's really stressed with work and everything with the divorce, and I don't want to—" "I understand, but this is serious." Mrs. Patterson's tone was firm but compassionate. "I'm going to email her tonight." That evening, Becca opened her laptop to find the message waiting. "Dylan seems withdrawn, and I noticed significant swelling on his neck. I know the divorce has been difficult for him. I'm concerned this might be stress-related or a sign of deeper emotional struggle. Please call me so we can discuss support options." Becca read it twice, relief washing through her. Oh, she thinks it's emotional. Maybe it is stress. She opened a new browser tab and typed, "Can anxiety cause lumps on neck?" The results were reassuring. Articles about tension, stress-related lymph node swelling, psychosomatic symptoms in teenagers processing trauma. She closed the laptop, feeling something like vindication. We just need to get through to March. Maybe I should look into therapy for him. Address the emotional side. By the second week of school, Dylan had stopped sitting with friends at lunch. He ate alone in the library, hiding behind a book he wasn't really reading. His phone buzzed with messages from Marcus. "Dude, where are you? Is this about Jake? We can deal with him." Dylan typed and deleted responses, finally settling on silence. At night, in the privacy of his room, he'd started drawing. The sketchbook his grandmother had given him for Christmas began filling with images that grew progressively darker. Early pages showed baseball fields and mountains. Later pages featured faceless figures, shadows with teeth, distorted necks. On one page, he'd written in shaky letters, "What if it's hungry?" He hid the sketchbook under his mattress where his mother wouldn't find it. October brought cold mornings and a visit from Tom that nobody had asked for. He arrived on a Saturday with a box of vintage baseball cards, wanting to surprise Dylan, to bridge the distance that had grown between them. Dylan opened the door. Tom's smile died on his lips. "Jesus Christ, Dylan." He stared at the mass, now the size of a small orange, visible even through Dylan's thick sweater. The skin had taken on a purplish tinge, stretched shiny over whatever was growing beneath. "How long has it been this big?" "It's fine, Dad. Mom says—" Tom pushed past him into the house. "Rebecca!" Becca emerged from the kitchen, and the fight that followed was the worst since the divorce. Tom's voice cracked with fear disguised as anger. Becca's responses were defensive, sharp, each word a shield against the accusation in his eyes. They shouted about responsibility, about money, about who had the right to make decisions about their son's health. "Stop it!" Dylan's voice cut through their argument like broken glass. Both parents froze. Their son stood in the doorway, tears streaming down his face. "You're fighting because of me. Again. Just like before you got divorced." "Baby, no," Becca started. "I'm fine. It doesn't hurt. Can everyone just stop?" He ran to his room, slammed the door hard enough to rattle the frame. In the terrible silence that followed, Tom spoke quietly. "Becca, if you don't take him to the ER today, I'm calling a lawyer. I'll file for emergency custody." "You wouldn't. Watch me. That's our son, dying in front of us." "He's not dying." But her voice shook. "Stop being so dramatic." They argued in harsh whispers, trading blame and fear in equal measure, neither willing to admit they were both terrified. Finally, Tom left, slamming the car door, the sound echoing through the neighborhood. That night, at 2 a.m, Dylan appeared in his mother's bedroom doorway. Becca woke to find him standing there in the darkness, silent tears on his face. She pulled back the covers without a word, and he climbed in beside her, like he hadn't done since he was 7 years old. His body shook with suppressed sobs. She held him, feeling how thin he'd gotten, how his shoulder blades pressed sharp through his t-shirt. "Mom," he whispered finally, "what if I'm dying?" Her heart cracked. "You're not dying. Don't even say that." "Then why is it getting bigger? Why won't it stop?" Becca had no answer. She just held him tighter, making promises she had no way to keep. "We'll figure it out. I promise. Soon. Very soon." But soon became tomorrow, and tomorrow became next week, and the bump continued its patient, relentless growth. Thanksgiving arrived, wrapped in the lie of Norman Rockwell perfection. Becca had set the table with her grandmother's china, arranged fall decorations with desperate cheerfulness, and prepared a turkey that filled the house with the smell of holidays that used to feel simpler. If she could just make everything look normal, maybe it would become normal. Helen Morrison arrived at noon carrying her famous pumpkin pie, her silver hair pinned in its usual neat bun. She kissed her daughter's cheek, then turned to embrace her grandson. "Come give Grandma a hug, sweetheart." Dylan stood from the couch and crossed the living room. The moment Helen's arms went around him, she went completely still. Her hands, which had been moving toward his shoulders, froze in midair. She pulled back slowly, her face draining of color as she stared at his neck. The mass had grown enormous, the size of a small grapefruit now, impossible to hide or dismiss. The skin stretched over it was shiny and discolored, purple-red like a bruise that had never healed. Worst of all, it pulsed visibly with each heartbeat, a grotesque rhythm that made it look alive. Rebecca Lynn Morrison. Helen's voice carried the weight of her full name, the tone she'd used when Becca was 16 and had wrecked the car. "Mom," Becca started, "what in the name of God is on that child's neck?" "We have an appointment scheduled." "When?" Helen's voice cut like surgical steel. "January 15th. That's 6 weeks." Helen wasn't shouting, but somehow the quiet fury was worse. "That boy needs a hospital, now." "Mom, you don't understand." The emergency room is $5,000 out of pocket without pre-authorization. I don't have, and a funeral costs $10,000. The words landed like a slap. Silence filled the room, thick and suffocating. Dylan stood frozen between them, his face pale. "May I be excused?" His voice was barely a whisper. "Baby, yes, I'm so sorry." Becca was crying now, helpless tears that she'd been holding back for months. Dylan left without taking his plate. They heard his bedroom door close with careful gentleness, which somehow hurt more than if he'd slammed it. Helen and Becca stood alone in the dining room, surrounded by untouched food and broken pretenses. "Your father had a shrapnel wound in Korea," Helen said quietly, "in his calf. He said it was healing fine. No pain, no fever, just a small wound that wouldn't quite close." "Mom, I know this story." "Then you know he waited 3 months to get it x-rayed. Said the medics were too busy with serious cases. Said he didn't want to be dramatic." Helen's hands shook as she gripped the back of a chair. By the time they finally looked at it, the infection had spread to the bone. They saved his leg, but he never walked right again. The complications from that wound killed him at 52. Becca wiped her eyes roughly. "Dylan doesn't have an infection." "You don't know what he has. That's the entire point." Helen's voice finally rose. "You're guessing, hoping, waiting. And every day you wait, that thing gets bigger." "I'm doing the best I can!" Becca's shout echoed through the house. "I know you are," Helen's voice softened. "But sometimes our best isn't enough. Sometimes we need to swallow our pride and ask for help. From who? Tom? So he can prove he's the better parent? So he can show a judge I'm neglectful? From me, Rebecca. I have savings. I don't need charity." "It's not charity. It's family." Helen reached across the table, but Becca pulled away. "We'll wait for January." "It's 6 weeks. He can wait 6 weeks." Helen stared at her daughter, seeing her own stubbornness reflected back. That Morrison pride that had always been both their strength and their curse. "I hope you're right," she said finally, "because if you're wrong, you'll carry that for the rest of your life." She began clearing dishes in weighted silence, the sound of silverware against china like small accusations. Upstairs, Dylan stood in the bathroom staring at his reflection. The mass dominated the right side of his neck, distorting his profile into something monstrous. He touched it with trembling fingers. It was hot beneath his skin, pulsing with its own terrible life. "Please," he whispered to his reflection, "please just wait until January. Please don't kill me before January." December descended with early darkness and the kind of cold that made bones ache. The mass continued its relentless expansion. Dylan stopped going to school entirely. The stairs had become unbearable, the whispers following him down every hallway. Becca filed paperwork for homeschooling, though little actual education happened. Dylan spent his days in his darkened room, emerging only for meals he barely touched. His weight dropped precipitously. His mother's scales showed 128 pounds in November, 115 by mid-December. His face took on a gaunt, hollowed quality that made him look like a refugee from some private war. The drawings in his sketchbook grew more disturbing. Monsters with teeth eating human figures from the inside out. Faceless people with necks that split open like rotting fruit. On one page, written in letters that grew progressively more shaky, "It's eating me. It's eating me. It's eating me." The night sweats intensified until he was changing his sheets twice daily, the fabric soaked through with fever he claimed not to have. Becca found the damp linens and made excuses. Adolescent hormones, the house too warm, winter flu season. She'd become an expert at excuses, at explaining away each symptom as something normal, something that could wait 6 more weeks, then 4, then 3. The January appointment loomed like salvation, and she clung to it with desperate faith. Just make it to January 15th. Just hold on until then. On December 20th, at exactly 2:17 in the morning, that desperate faith shattered like glass. Becca woke to screaming, her son's voice, raw with terror, shouting the words that would change everything. "Mom! I can't breathe!" The scream tore Becca from a nightmare, where her dead father was trying to tell her something urgent. She jolted awake, disoriented, her heart already racing before her conscious mind understood why. Dylan's door slammed open, footsteps running. Then his voice, high and desperate, "Mom!" She ran into the hallway and stopped dead. Dylan stood outside his bedroom, both hands clutching his throat. His face was pale as paper, lips tinged blue. The mass on his neck had swollen to grotesque proportions overnight, the size of a cantaloupe, the skin stretched translucent thin and colored a sickening purple-black. Worst of all was the sound, a high-pitched wheezing with each attempted breath, a noise that shouldn't come from a human throat. "I can't breathe." Each word was a desperate gasp. Terror gave Becca clarity. She grabbed Dylan's arm, helped him sit on the floor. Okay, we're calling 911 right now." Her hands shook so violently she dropped her phone. It clattered against the hardwood. She snatched it up, fingers fumbling across the screen. 911, what's your emergency?" "My son, he can't breathe. There's a mass on his neck." "How old is your son, ma'am?" 13. "Please hurry." "How long has he been experiencing difficulty breathing?" "It just started, but the mass, it's been there 6 months." The words came out, and Becca heard how they sounded, heard the judgment in the operator's brief pause. 6 months? The operator's tone remained professional, but something had shifted. Shame burned through Becca's terror. "Yes, we had an appointment, January. Please just send help." "Ambulance is dispatched, ma'am. Keep him sitting upright. Don't let him lie down." "Is he conscious?" "Yes, Dylan, stay with me, baby." Dylan's breathing was getting worse, the spaces between each breath stretching longer. His lips were turning from blue to purple. Becca knelt beside him on the floor, one arm around his shoulders, holding him upright. She could feel his body shaking, could feel his ribs working desperately to pull in air through a windpipe being crushed. "Count with me," she said, her voice breaking. 1, 2, 3. Dylan's eyes met hers, terrified, pleading, but also resigned. His lips formed words without sound. "I'm sorry." "Don't," Becca choked out. "Don't you dare apologize. Just breathe. Keep breathing." 8 minutes passed. The longest 8 minutes of Becca's life. She counted Dylan's breaths, each one a small victory, each gap between them a fresh terror. Neighbors' lights flickered on. Mrs. Anderson from next door appeared at the front door in her bathrobe, took one look at Dylan, and pressed her hand to her mouth. "Can you call his father?" Becca managed. "Tom Morrison, Denver." "I'll call him." Mrs. Anderson disappeared. Red and blue lights suddenly flooded through the windows. Sirens died. Heavy footsteps on the porch. 2 paramedics burst through the door. The first, a man in his 40s, saw Dylan and stopped mid-stride. Jesus Christ! His partner, a woman in her 30s, was already kneeling, pulling equipment from her bag. "How long has this mass been present?" 6 months, Becca whispered. Both paramedics exchanged a glance. No words, but the judgment was there in their eyes. "We need to move now," the male paramedic said. "This is critical airway compromise." He fitted an oxygen mask over Dylan's face while his partner checked vitals. "Oxygen saturation is 84%, she reported, her voice tight. "We need to transport immediately." They loaded Dylan onto a gurney with practiced efficiency. The oxygen mask fogged with each labored breath. Becca climbed into the ambulance behind them, her bare feet still in bedroom slippers, her mind unable to process anything beyond the terror of watching her son struggle for air. The ambulance screamed through Boulder's empty streets. Inside, the female paramedic worked steadily, monitoring Dylan's vitals, adjusting oxygen flow. Her partner drove with controlled urgency. "Stay with us, Dylan," the paramedic said. "Keep breathing. You're doing great." But the monitors told a different story. The oxygen saturation kept dropping. 82%, 80%, 78%. "We might need to intubate," the paramedic said quietly. "What does that mean?" Becca's voice was barely audible. "A breathing tube, if his airway closes completely. This is my fault." The words came out broken. "This is all my fault." The paramedic met her eyes briefly. "Ma'am, let's focus on getting him stable." Boulder Community Hospital's emergency entrance blazed with light. A trauma team waited. The ambulance doors flew open, and Dylan was rushed inside, paramedics calling out vitals and information. 13-year-old male, respiratory distress, large neck mass, O2 sat 78%. "Get me an airway cart, now! Call ENT, call surgery, I need portable CT." The gurney disappeared through trauma bay doors. Becca stood, frozen in the ambulance bay, still in her pajamas and slippers, watching her son vanish into a chaos of medical professionals and beeping machines. A nurse touched her arm gently. "Ma'am, you'll need to wait in." But Becca couldn't move, couldn't breathe, couldn't think beyond the image of Dylan's blue lips, the desperate wheeze of his struggling lungs, the terrible weight of 6 months of waiting that had brought them to this moment. Her phone buzzed. A text from Mrs. Anderson. "Called Tom. He's on his way." Another text from her mother. "Coming now." Becca sank into a plastic chair in the waiting room, her body numb, her mind trapped in an endless loop of if only. If only she'd taken him to urgent care in June. If only she'd pushed harder for an earlier appointment. If only she'd listened to Tom, to her mother, to the voice in her own head that had known, had always known, something was terribly wrong. If only. If only. If only. 20 minutes after the ambulance arrived, Helen burst through the emergency room doors. She found her daughter sitting rigid in a plastic chair, staring at nothing, still wearing pajamas and bedroom slippers. Helen sat beside her without a word and pulled Becca into her arms. 30 minutes later, Tom screeched into the parking lot, still in pajama pants with a coat thrown over, having driven 90 miles per hour from Denver. He ran into the ER, wild-eyed, and spotted them immediately. "Is he alive?" No anger in his voice, just fear stripped bare. Becca nodded, unable to speak. Tom collapsed into the chair on her other side, dropped his head into his hands. For the first time in 2 years, the three of them sat together in shared terror. Divisions forgotten in the face of something larger than pride or blame. The trauma bay doors opened. A young Asian American woman emerged, still in surgical scrubs, a cap covering her hair. Despite the exhaustion in her eyes, she carried herself with the calm authority of someone who'd learned to deliver difficult news with compassion. "Morrison family?" All three stood at once. "I'm Dr. Sarah Chen, pediatric surgery. Dylan is stable. We've secured his airway with a breathing tube." She paused, letting them absorb the good news before delivering the rest. "But we need to operate immediately. The mass is compressing his trachea at 70%. Without intervention, he'll suffocate within hours." "Then operate," Tom said immediately. "I need you to understand something first." Dr. Chen's voice was gentle, but firm. "This mass, I've never seen anything quite like it. The CT scan shows unusual density patterns, calcifications." "I won't know exactly what we're dealing with until we open it." "Is it cancer?" Becca's voice came out as a whisper. "I don't know. We'll send everything to pathology for analysis." She produced a consent form. Becca tried to sign, but her hand shook so violently she couldn't control the pen. Dr. Chen steadied her wrist gently. "Mrs. Morrison, I need you to understand there are risks. The mass is wrapped around major blood vessels. If it's infiltrated the carotid artery—" She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't have to. "If you don't operate, he dies anyway, right?" Becca's eyes were dry now, burned out. "Yes." Becca signed. The timestamp read 3:47 a.m. At 4:15 a.m., in Operating Room 3, Dr. Chen stood over Dylan Morrison's unconscious body. The surgical lights cast harsh shadows across the grotesque swelling that had brought them all to this moment. Under the bright illumination, the mass looked even more disturbing. Skin stretched, translucent, blue veins crisscrossing its surface, pulsing with each beat of the anesthesia-maintained heart. Her surgical resident, Dr. Mark Peterson, stood across from her. The scrub nurse, Linda, a veteran who'd worked in this OR for 30 years, held instruments ready. The anesthesiologist monitored vitals with careful attention. "I'm going to make a vertical incision," Dr. Chen explained for the recording. "Best case scenario, dermoid cyst. Worst case, malignant tumor with vascular invasion." She pressed the scalpel to the skin. It parted easily, too easily. The tissue atrophied from months of stretching. Clear fluid leaked out, normal enough for a cyst. Dr. Chen continued her careful dissection, separating tissue planes, working toward the cyst wall. It was thick, well encapsulated. "This is good," she murmured, "well contained." She made an opening in the cyst wall. Sebaceous material, fatty tissue oozed out. Still normal, still manageable. "Dermoid cyst," she said with relief. "That's—" Wait. Something dark was mixed into the fatty material. She paused, gestured to Linda. "Better light, please." The surgical lamp adjusted. Dr. Chen used forceps to extract the dark material. Hair. Human hair. Not just a few strands, but a thick clump of long, dark hair. Dr. Peterson's eyes widened above his mask. Linda took an involuntary step backward. "It's a teratoma," Dr. Chen said, her professional calm barely masking her shock. She'd seen pictures in medical school, read case studies, but never encountered one in person. She continued extracting contents. More hair, more sebaceous tissue. Then something white and hard caught the light. Using forceps with extreme care, she extracted it. A tooth. Fully formed, adult molar. Perfect white enamel. Complete root structure. The only sound in the OR was the steady beep of monitors. Dr. Chen placed it in the specimen tray and continued. She found a second tooth, then a third. 3 perfect molars that had been growing inside a 13-year-old's neck. "How is this possible?" Dr. Peterson's voice was tight. Teratomas contain pluripotent stem cells, Dr. Chen explained, falling back on clinical language to manage her own unease. They can differentiate into any tissue type: skin, hair, teeth, bone. She continued the painstaking work of removing the entire mass. Bone fragments appeared, cartilage, more hair. And then she saw something that made even her pause: a small round structure about the size of a pea, pigmented, with what looked like a dark center and lighter rim. "Mark, look at this." The resident leaned in, then straightened abruptly. "Is that ocular tissue?" "Part of an eye structure." "Yes." Linda turned away briefly, composing herself. In 30 years, she'd never seen anything like this. 45 minutes of meticulous dissection. The entire mass was removed, the size of an orange, weighing 380 grams. Dr. Chen placed it in a specimen container where the teeth, hair, and tissue fragments looked like something from a nightmare. "Send everything to pathology," she instructed. "Multiple samples. I want this rushed." She closed the wound with careful precision, placed a drain, and finally stepped back from the table. Dr. Peterson looked shaken. "Will he be okay?" "Depends on pathology." Dr. Chen stripped off her gloves. "If it's a mature teratoma, benign, he'll be fine. If it's immature or has undergone malignant transformation," she trailed off. "How long for results?" 72 hours. I'm putting a rush on it." At 7:30 a.m., as sunrise painted the waiting room windows gold, Dr. Chen emerged to face the Morrison family. She sat across from them, still in her scrubs, and delivered the news. Surgery successful. Mass removed. Dylan stable. "What was it?" Becca asked. Dr. Chen took a breath. "A teratoma. We found teeth, 3 of them, fully formed. Also hair, bone, and ocular tissue." "Teeth?" Helen whispered. "Inside his neck?" "Yes. It was likely dormant since birth. The trauma from his baseball injury probably triggered rapid growth." Dr. Chen paused. "We won't know if it's benign or malignant until pathology comes back." 72 hours. They waited. Dylan woke in recovery to find his mother, father, and grandmother gathered around his bed like saints in a medieval painting, watchful, hopeful, exhausted. His throat ached from the breathing tube. He tried to speak, but could only manage a hoarse whisper. "Don't talk, baby." Becca's hand found his. "You're safe." "It's gone." They took it out. Dylan's other hand moved instinctively to his neck. Instead of the grotesque mass that had defined the last 6 months of his life, he felt only bandages and flatness. His eyes widened with understanding, then filled with tears of relief. Over the next 3 days, Dylan moved from recovery to the pediatric ward. His voice returned, rough but usable. The first time he saw himself in a mirror, neck bandaged but mercifully flat, he cried with something between joy and disbelief. "I look normal again." Hope bloomed cautiously in all of them. Dylan ate his first full meal in weeks. Color returned to his cheeks. He joked with nurses, asked about going home, talked about trying out for the baseball team again when spring arrived. On the second day, a boy appeared in Dylan's doorway pushing an IV pole decorated with stickers. He was 14, completely bald, wearing a T-shirt that read, "Cancer picked the wrong guy." "You're the teratoma kid, right?" The boy grinned. "I heard you had teeth in your neck. That's hardcore." Dylan blinked. Thanks." "I'm Tyler. I've got boring leukemia, 2 years of chemo and counting. But teeth in your neck? You win the weird contest." He rolled his IV pole into the room without waiting for invitation. "Want to play Mario Kart? Rec Room has a Nintendo from like 1995, but it works." For the first time since June, Dylan laughed. Really laughed. Tyler became a fixture over the next 2 days, appearing at odd hours with video games, terrible jokes, and the unsentimental wisdom of someone who'd learned to live with dying. He taught Dylan the unwritten rules of the cancer ward. Don't let them call you brave. It's okay to be angry. Hospital jello is a war crime. On the third morning, Dr. Chen returned during rounds. Dylan sat up straighter, sensing the shift in her demeanor. "Dylan, I'd like to speak with you and your family about the pathology results." Her voice was gentle but professional. "Whatever it is, tell me here," Dylan said. "I'm not a little kid." Dr. Chen looked at Becca, who nodded. Tom took Dylan's hand. "The pathology shows immature teratoma with malignant transformation." Dr. Chen let the words settle. Some of the cells in the tumor were cancerous. Silence filled the room like water rising. "So I have cancer." Dylan's voice was remarkably steady. "Yes." Tom's grip on Dylan's hand tightened. "How bad?" "Stage 3. The cancer has spread to regional lymph nodes. We removed the primary tumor, but cancer cells have reached nearby lymph nodes. We need to start treatment immediately. Chemotherapy and possibly radiation." Becca's voice came out hollow. "What's his prognosis?" Dr. Chen chose her words carefully. "With aggressive treatment, the 5-year survival rate is 60 to 70%. What she didn't say hung in the air. 30 to 40% don't make it." Dylan nodded slowly. "When do we start?" "Tomorrow we'll place a central line. Chemotherapy begins 48 hours after that." After Dr. Chen left, the family sat in weighted silence. Finally, Dylan spoke. "Tyler's been doing this for 2 years. If he can handle it, so can I." Treatment began with a brutality that no amount of preparation could soften. The first week brought constant nausea and vomiting. Dylan lost 8 pounds. Becca slept in a chair beside his bed, waking at every sound. The second week, his hair fell out. He woke one morning to find his pillow covered in dark strands. He stared at it, unmoving, until Tyler appeared in the doorway. "Welcome to the Bald Club." Tyler rubbed his own smooth head. "We have jackets. Also, you won't have to pay for haircuts anymore, so that's basically free money." Despite everything, Dylan laughed through his tears. By week 3, mouth sores developed, making eating and drinking agonizing. Becca fed him ice chips and watched her son shrink. By week 4, his blood counts dropped dangerously low. He was moved to isolation, where everyone had to gown and mask before entering. "I'm radioactive now," Dylan joked weakly. Tyler, separated by glass and isolation protocol, pressed his palm to the window. Dylan pressed his palm to the other side. No words needed. Becca quit her real estate job. There was no choice. Savings evaporated. Tom helped with medical bills, driving from Denver every few days. Slowly, painfully, they began functioning as a team again, united by their son's survival. By the 8th week, scans showed the tumors shrinking. Dr. Chen allowed herself a cautious smile. "He's responding beautifully." Dylan gained weight. His appetite returned. He started talking about the future, baseball tryouts, maybe learning guitar, normal teenage dreams that had seemed impossible a month ago. Becca cried tears of relief for the first time in 6 months. "You're going to be okay." Then came the 10th week. Tyler stopped visiting. Dylan asked nurses what was wrong, but their answers were vague and gentle. Finally, standing outside Tyler's room, Dylan overheard the conversation he wasn't supposed to hear. "The leukemia has spread to his brain." At this point, we're focused on comfort. "How long?" Tyler's mother's voice was destroyed. "Days to weeks." Dylan backed away silently, returned to his room, and told no one. 2 days later, Tyler's mother wheeled him to Dylan's room. Tyler was pale, barely conscious, but he smiled when he saw Dylan. "Morrison, you look like hell." "You're one to talk." Dylan forced the words past the lump in his throat. Tyler's mother left them alone. The boys sat in silence, broken only by the beep of monitors. Finally, Tyler spoke, each word an effort. "Listen. I'm not going to see those northern lights." "Don't say that. Let me say this." Tyler's eyes were fierce despite his failing body. "When I'm gone, you keep fighting. For both of us. Promise me." Dylan's tears came freely. "I promise." "Good. Now stop crying. You're making me look bad." They both laughed and cried until Tyler fell asleep. 3 days later, a nurse came to Dylan's room with a face that said everything. Tyler had passed away in the early morning, peacefully, his parents beside him. Dylan turned to face the wall and wept silently for hours. 2 weeks after Tyler's death, during a routine scan, Dr. Chen returned with grave news. The scan shows new masses. 3 lesions in your chest cavity. Becca's world tilted, but he was getting better. Teratomas sometimes show brief remission before aggressive recurrence. Dr. Chen's professional mask cracked slightly. Dylan weighs 98 pounds now. His body is severely compromised. More aggressive chemotherapy might give us a few more months, but there's no guarantee it will work. And the quality of life. She turned to Dylan. "This is your choice, too." Dylan looked at the ceiling, thinking of Tyler, thinking of teeth growing in his neck, thinking of 6 months of being too scared to worry his mother. Finally, he spoke. "I don't want more chemo. I'm tired. I want to feel okay, even if it's just for a little while." He looked at his parents. "I want to go home. And I want to see the mountains." Tom's hand settled on his son's shoulder. "It's your choice, buddy." "I want to see the mountains," Dylan repeated. "Tyler never got to see his northern lights. I want to see my mountains." They took him home on hospice care. 1 week later, in the thin air of Rocky Mountain National Park, Dylan sat in a wheelchair, with oxygen flowing, watching the sunset paint the peaks gold and purple. His parents stood on either side, touching him, connected after years of distance. "This is perfect," Dylan whispered. "Tyler would have loved this." As the sun set over the mountains, Dylan Morrison smiled, truly, completely smiled. And for one perfect moment, everything was exactly as it should be. 3 days later, at 5:47 a.m., surrounded by everyone he loved, Dylan took his last breath and went to join his friend among whatever lights await beyond the darkness. But the story didn't end there. 6 months after Dylan's death, Becca Morrison stood at a podium before 200 people, parents, doctors, legislators, and shared her son's timeline. The photos she showed made people gasp. June's small bump to January's grotesque mass. "My son had teeth growing in his neck," she said. "I waited 6 months for an appointment. 3 months after surgery, he died. I'm here so no other family waits like we did." The Don't Wait Foundation launched with a simple mission: free telemedicine triage for worried parents, fast-track imaging partnerships, and legislation mandating insurance coverage for pediatric emergencies. Her viral post, before and after photos with the caption, "This is what doesn't hurt looks like," was shared 5 million times. Over 50 families reported early catches of teratomas, lymphomas, and cancers because they'd seen Dylan's story and refused to wait. 1 year after Dylan's death, Becca visited the cemetery where 2 graves sat side by side: Dylan Morrison and Tyler Grant. But she wasn't alone. 50 families whose children had lived because of Dylan's story gathered there. They released balloons into the Colorado sky, each carrying the message, "Thank you, Dylan." At a nearby baseball field, a Little League game played. One 7-year-old boy, whose neck lump had been caught at stage 1 because his mother had seen Becca's post, wore jersey number 14. He hit a home run while his mother cried tears of gratitude in the stands. Becca watched with Tom and Helen beside her. In the clouds, a break of light appeared, and for just a moment, it looked like a smile. Dylan's last words echoed, "Help other kids. Be the annoying mom." She had kept her promise, and in doing so had transformed tragedy into 50 small miracles, each one a child who would grow up to live the life her son never could. The warm spring sun set over the mountains Dylan had loved, and somewhere in that golden light, 2 boys played eternal baseball, while northern lights danced above peaks that touched the sky. Sometimes the greatest gift we can give those we've lost is refusing to let their story end with them. Dylan Morrison never wanted to be remembered as the boy who died. He wanted his struggle to mean something bigger than himself. His mother, Becca, honored that wish, not through grief alone, but through action that transformed one family's tragedy into 50 miracles. She learned what so many of us discover too late, that pride can be as deadly as any disease, that asking for help isn't weakness, but wisdom, and that sometimes the bravest thing we can do is admit we were wrong and do better going forward. The Don't Wait Foundation stands as proof that even our deepest regrets can become someone else's salvation. Those 50 children who lived because parents refused to wait. They're Dylan's true legacy, his light still shining long after sunset. Every family reunion those children attend, every birthday cake with candles blown out, every graduation cap thrown into the air, that's Dylan and Tyler, still here, still mattering. What loss in your life might hold the seeds of helping others? Have you ever turned personal pain into something that served your community? Share your story in the comments. Sometimes the most healing thing we can do is speak our truth aloud and let others know they're not alone in carrying the weight of, if only.